Here's a fresh batch of 13 two-seater sports cars from the 1970s. Notorious for their quirks, shortcomings, and, in some cases, outright failures. These cars had big ambitions but often fell short in crucial areas like performance, reliability, and design appeal. While they were meant to impress, they left drivers frustrated and scratching their heads. Get ready to explore the worst sports cars into the 1970s. You won't believe how some of these failed to live up to the hype. The Volkswagen SP2. 1972 to 1976 is one of the most intriguing cars to emerge from Brazil, a country not typically associated with automotive exotica. Conceived and produced by Volkswagen do Brasil, the SP2 was born out of a desire to create a stylish, homegrown sports car that would stand out in a market dominated by utilitarian vehicles. It was a bold and beautiful attempt, featuring sleek lines, a low-slung profile, and a distinctive presence that made it look like a European sports coupe. However, despite its promising appearance, the SP2 fell short in delivering the performance and driving dynamics its design suggested, leaving it as a classic case of style over substance. The SP2's origins can be traced to Volkswagen's desire to create a unique car specifically for the Brazilian market, where import restrictions meant local production was essential. The design team, led by Brazilian engineer José Vicente Novita Martins, took inspiration from European sports cars, crafting a long, aerodynamic body with smooth curves and a low stance. The result was a car that looked exotic and modern, even when parked next to more prestigious imports. Aesthetically, the SP2 was a triumph. The front end featured slim, chrome-trimmed headlights integrated into the bodywork, while the rear showcased a fastback design with a clean, minimalist tail. The attention to detail extended to the interior, which, though simple, was well finished with supportive seats and a sporty dashboard layout. The two-seat configuration and low seating position reinforced the SP2's sports car aspirations. It was undoubtedly one of the most beautiful cars Volkswagen ever produced, earning the nickname, the most beautiful Volkswagen. However, the SP2's beauty was only skin deep. Underneath that alluring bodywork lay the humble underpinnings of the Volkswagen Type 3. Power came from a 1.7-liter air-cooled flat-4 engine, producing just 75 horsepower. While this engine was robust and easy to maintain, it was woefully inadequate for a car with such sporty pretensions. The SP2's 0 to 60 MAF time of around 16 seconds was more fitting for an economy car than a sleek coupe, and its top speed of 100 miles per hour was similarly uninspiring. The lack of power became a running joke, with Brazilian enthusiasts coining the phrase sem potência, without power, to describe the SP2's performance. Despite its lightweight and low center of gravity, the car's performance felt sluggish, especially when compared to contemporary sports cars. The handling was predictable, but far from thrilling, as the rear-engine, rear-wheel drive layout borrowed heavily from the Beetle and Type 3. The SP2 was more about cruising than corner carving, which disappointed drivers hoping for a true sports car experience. Reliability, however, was a strong point. The air-cooled engine, though underpowered, was simple and durable, making the SP2 easy to maintain. Parts were plentiful thanks to its shared mechanicals with other Volkswagen models, and the car's build quality was solid. Rust protection was better than many of its European counterparts, which helped the SP2 survive in Brazil's humid climate. The cost interior, while stylish, was hardened, Spartan, and cramped. Taller drivers found the cockpit tight, and the lack of power-assisted features, such as steering and brakes, made the SP2 feel old-fashioned, even by the standards of the early 1970s. The driving position, with its high-mounted pedals and offset steering wheel, took some getting used to, and the ride quality was firm but not particularly comfortable on rough roads. An Arnie owner's perspective paints a vivid picture of life with the SP2. It's the car you buy with your heart, not your head. Every time I see it, I fall in love again. But driving it? That's a different story. It looks fast standing still, But the moment you press the gas, reality sets in. It's not a car for racing, it's a car for being seen, and for that, it's perfect. Despite its shortcomings, the SP2 has gained a cult following among collectors and enthusiasts. Its rarity, fewer than 11,000 were produced, and unique status as a Brazilian-built sports car make it a sought-after classic today. The SP2's legacy lies not in its performance, but in its timeless design, and the audacity of Volkswagen do Brazil to dream big in a constrained market. In retrospect, the Volkswagen SP2 was a car of contradictions, visually stunning yet mechanically mundane, exotic yet familiar. It embodied the idea that sometimes style is enough to create a legend, even if the substance doesn't quite match up. For those who appreciate it, the SP2 is a reminder that cars can be celebrated as much for their ambition as for their achievements. The Mazda Cosmo RX5, 1975 to 1981, stands as one of the more intriguing and ambitious cars in Mazda's history. It was conceived at a time when Mazda was pushing the boundaries of engineering, driven by a desire to establish itself as a serious contender in the world of performance and luxury automobiles. Building on the success of the earlier Cosmo Sport and Mazda's growing expertise with rotary engines, the RX-5 aimed to merge the allure of a grand tour with the unique benefits of rotary power. The result was a car that turned heads but ultimately couldn't quite live up to the expectations set by its design and aspirations. The RX-5's exterior was, without a doubt, one of its most compelling features. The long hood, sloping fastback roofline, and pop-up headlights gave the car a sleek and modern look. At a glance, it evoked images of high-performance coupes from Europe and America, blending elements of Japanese design with international flair. Mazda intended the RX-5 to appeal to buyers seeking something upscale and unique, positioning it as a personal luxury coupe. The fastback silhouette was elegant and aerodynamic, while the proportions were balanced and pleasing to the eye. In some markets, a more traditional notchback version was offered, but it was the fastback that captured the imagination of enthusiasts. Inside, the RX-5's cabin was designed to deliver a sense of luxury and sophistication. The materials, while not quite up to the standards of high-end European brands, were impressive for a Japanese car of the era. The dashboard featured wood grain accents, a center console with a sporty yet refined layout, and a variety of analog gauges that provided a cockpit-like feel. Leather upholstery, power windows, air conditioning, and other premium features were available, creating an environment that felt comfortable and inviting. The seating was plush, and the car could comfortably accommodate 4 passengers, making it a practical choice for those who wanted both style and space. However, the one rotary engine. At the heart of the RX-5 was both its defining feature and its greatest liability. Available in 12A and later 13B variants, the rotary engine was compact, lightweight, and capable of delivering smooth, high-revving power. On paper, it seemed like the perfect match for a grand tour. In reality, the engine's quirks quickly became apparent. The RX-5 was a relatively heavy car, and the rotary engine struggled to deliver the kind of performance that its sporty appearance promised. Acceleration was leisurely, with 0 to 60 miles per hour times hovering around 10 seconds. Far from impressive in a car marketed as a luxury sports coupe. The rotary engine's fuel consumption was another major drawback. Known for their thirst, rotary engines required frequent refueling, especially in urban driving conditions. Owners often found themselves visiting the gas station more frequently than they'd like, and during the fuel crises of the 1970s, this became a significant issue. The engine also demanded regular maintenance, with oil consumption and apex seal wear being constant concerns. While enthusiasts were willing to put up with these demands for the sake of rotary uniqueness, more casual buyers were often frustrated by the engine's need for careful upkeep. On the road, the RX-5 was more of a cruiser than a corner carver. The front suspension setup prioritized comfort over handling, resulting in a smooth ride on highways, but a lack of agility on twisty roads. Body roll was noticeable in corners, and the steering, while adequate, lacked the precision and feedback that driving enthusiasts crave. The car felt at home on long, straight stretches of road where its comfortable ride and low noise levels made for relaxed cruising. But when pushed hard, it revealed its limitations, feeling more like a stylish Grand Tourer than a true sports car. Reliability was another area where the RX-5 faced challenges. The rotary engine, while innovative, had a reputation for fragility. Electrical issues, rust-prone body panels, and a general lack of build quality were common complaints. Owners often found themselves dealing with niggling issues that detracted from the overall ownership experience. Trim pieces would rattle, switches would fail, and the bodywork required regular attention to prevent corrosion. In regions with harsh winters, rust could become a serious problem, leading to structural issues if not addressed promptly. For owners, the RX-5 was a mixed bag. Some fell in love with its unique design and the smoothness of the rotary engine, appreciating the car's character despite its flaws. Others grew frustrated with the high running costs, frequent maintenance, and underwhelming performance. One owner described their experience as follows: "The RX-5 is a car that gets under your skin. It's beautiful to look at and has a charm that's hard to explain. But owning one is a commitment." The Renault Alpine A310, 1971 to 1984, was born into an enviable but challenging position. It was the successor to the legendary Alpine A110, a car that had become a rally icon and set the standard for lightweight, nimble sports cars. The A310, however, represented a different vision. It was designed not just as a pure performance machine, but as a more refined, road-focused sports coupe, aiming to appeal to a broader audience. Unfortunately, in trying to strike a balance between agility and comfort, it failed to fully satisfy either side of the equation. At first glance, the A310's design was a bold statement. The angular, wedge-shaped body, created by designer Michel Belagon, reflected the futuristic styling trends of the 1970s. Gone were the curvaceous lines of the A110. In their place was a sharper, more aggressive silhouette. The A310 featured a long nose, pop-up headlights, and a fastback rear, giving it a distinctive and modern look. Later models, particularly after the 1976 facelift, incorporated even more aggressive design elements, including fender flares and a wider stance. It was visually striking and undeniably more contemporary than its predecessor. But not everyone appreciated the departure from the classic Alpine aesthetic. Underneath the stylish exterior, the A310 was initially powered by a relatively modest 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine, borrowed from the Renault 17 TS. Producing around 125 horsepower, it offered adequate performance but fell short of expectations for a car bearing the Alpine badge. Acceleration was leisurely compared to its rivals, with a 0 to 60 miles per hour time of over 8 seconds. This was particularly disappointing for those accustomed to the lively, razor-sharp dynamics of the A110. Critics were quick to point out that the A310's added weight, primarily due to its larger dimensions and more luxurious interior, dulled its agility and responsiveness. In 1976, Renault attempted to address these concerns by introducing the A310 V6R, which was powered by a 2.7-liter V6 engine, co-developed with Peugeot and Volvo. This engine produced 150 horsepower, significantly improving performance. The V6 version could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 7.5 seconds, making it more competitive in its class. However, the added power did little to mask the fact that the A310 had lost some of the light-footedness that defined the A110. The car's balance and handling were compromised by its increased weight and rear-biased weight distribution, leading to a tendency for oversteer in aggressive cornering. The A310 also struggled with build quality and reliability issues. Owners frequently reported problems with the car's electrical system, which was prone to failures and malfunctions. The fiberglass body, while resistant to rust, often suffered from poor fit and finish. Interior quality was another weak point, with cheap materials and dated ergonomics that failed to deliver on the car's promise of being a more refined, comfortable sports coupe. Noise insulation was minimal, and the cabin could feel cramped despite the car's larger size. On the road, the A310 was a mixed experience. While the car could be enjoyable on open highways and fast, sweeping roads, it lacked the sharp, immediate feedback and precision that enthusiasts had come to expect from Alpine. The steering was light but not particularly communicative, and the suspension, though more compliant than that of the A110, failed to inspire confidence in tighter bends. For those seeking a thrilling, engaging drive, the A310 often felt like a compromise. From a sales perspective, the A310 also struggled. Despite its striking looks and Renault's marketing efforts, it never achieved the commercial success that was hoped for. The car's relatively high price, coupled with its lackluster performance and middling reputation, limited its appeal. Competing against more established sports cars from Porsche, Lotus, and others, the A310 was often overlooked. For owners, the experience of living with an A310 could be frustrating. One owner recounted their mixed feelings about the car. The A310 is one of those cars that you want to love. It looks fantastic, and when everything is working, it has a unique charm. But the reality is, it's not as fun to drive as you'd hope, and it spends too much time in the shop. The electrical gremlins alone are enough to drive you mad. I've had moments where I thought about selling it, but there's something about it that keeps me hanging on. Maybe it's the history, or maybe it's just that it's different from anything else on the road. Despite its flaws, the A310 has developed a cult following in recent years. Enthusiasts appreciate its unique place in automotive history as a bridge between the raw, lightweight Alpine sports cars of the past and the more sophisticated, performance-oriented models that would follow, such as the A610. The Peugeot 504 Coupe, 1969 to 1983, is a car that occupies a special place in the history of French automobiles, not for being a high-performance machine, but for embodying a sense of understated elegance and timeless design. Conceived as a luxurious alternative to the already successful Peugeot 504 sedan, the Coupe was aimed at those who valued style, comfort, and exclusivity. It was a car designed for the discerning driver who appreciated fine craftsmanship and sophisticated design, even if it lacked the outright performance to match its looks. The design of the 504 Coupe is widely regarded as one of its strongest attributes. Pininfarina, the famous Italian design house responsible for some of the most beautiful cars ever made, took the basic 504 platform and transformed it into something truly special. The result was a sleek, well-proportioned coupe with a long, flowing hood, a low-slung stance, and elegant lines that exuded sophistication. The front end featured a distinctive grille flanked by dual round headlights, giving the car a confident, upscale presence. The fastback rear and subtly flared wheel arches added a touch of sportiness without being over the top. Even today, the 504 Coupe's design is praised for its elegance and restraint, qualities that have allowed it to age gracefully. Inside, the 504 Coupe continued the theme of understated luxury. The cabin was a comfortable, well-appointed space with our leather upholstery, wood trim, and a clean, uncluttered dashboard. Peugeot paid attention to the details, ensuring that everything from the stitching on the seats to the tactile feel of the controls reflected the car's premium positioning. The seats were supportive and plush, making the car a joy to spend time in, especially on long drives. However, the interior was not without its flaws. Ergonomics were somewhat dated, even by the standards of the time, and the quality of some materials left room for improvement. Still, the overall ambiance was one of quiet sophistication, a perfect match for the car's grand touring aspirations. Mechanically, the 504 Coupe shared much with the standard 504 sedan, including its rear-wheel drive layout and suspension setup. Early models were powered by a 2.0-liter four-cylinder engine, producing around 104 horsepower. This engine was smooth and reliable, but lacked the power to deliver exciting performance. Acceleration was leisurely, with a 0 to 60 mph time of over 11 seconds, and top speed was modest, hovering around 110 mph. Later in its production run, Peugeot introduced a 2.7-liter V6 1 which offered a slight bump in power to around 136 to 150 horsepower, depending on the market and specifications. While the V6 improved performance, it was still not enough to turn the 504 Coupe into a true sports car. On the road, the 504 Coupe was clearly designed for comfort rather than speed. The suspension was tuned to soak up bumps and imperfections, delivering a smooth, composed ride that made long journeys a pleasure. However, this focus on comfort came at the expense of handling. The car felt heavy and somewhat ponderous in corners, with noticeable body roll and a lack of sharpness in the steering. Enthusiasts who expected a more dynamic driving experience were often disappointed. The 504 Coupe excelled as a grand tourer, but it fell short when compared to more performance-oriented rivals like the BMW 3.0 CS or the Mercedes-Benz SL. Another area where the 504 Coupe struggled was reliability and maintenance. While Peugeot's sedans were known for their durability, the Coupe's more complex mechanicals introduced a range of potential problems. Electrical issues were common, with owners frequently dealing with faulty wiring and malfunctioning accessories. The V6 engine, in particular, required regular maintenance and was prone to overheating if not properly cared for. Rust was another significant concern, especially in regions with harsh winters or coastal climates. The fiberglass body panels helped mitigate some of these issues, but rust still found its way into critical areas, such as the chassis and underbody. For those who owned and loved the 504 Coupe, the car's charm often outweighed its flaws. One longtime owner described their experience as a mix of frustration and admiration. Owning a 504 Coupe is a bit like being in a relationship with someone who's high maintenance, but incredibly beautiful. You know it's going to cost you, and there will be moments of exasperation when things go wrong. But then you step back, look at the car, and remember why you fell in love with it in the first place. It's not about speed or handling, it's about style, comfort, and that indescribable feeling of driving something unique. Despite its shortcomings, the 504 Coupe has developed a loyal following among enthusiasts and collectors. In recent years, its rarity and timeless design have made it a sought-after classic. The Fiat 128.3 Peugeot 1975 to 1980 was a distinctive model in Fiat's lineup, combining the practicality of the Fiat 128 with the sporty, more adventurous spirit of a hatchback. The 128 had already achieved success for Fiat, being one of the earliest mass-market front-wheel drive cars that helped define an entire generation of compact cars. Fiat took this winning formula and infused it with a sportier personality, creating the Fiat 128.3 With its sharp, angular styling and an intent to appeal to the youthful, budget-conscious driver, the 128.3P was an attempt to inject fun into the economic compact car segment. At first glance, the Fiat 128.3P's design suggested a certain level of sportiness that made it stand out among other small economy cars of the era. The hatchback layout gave it a practicality that a traditional sedan couldn't match, and its low-slung stance, angular lines, and compact proportions gave it a sportier presence. Fiat's design team aimed to create a car that looked modern and dynamic, with the fastback rear end and the clean sculpted sides making it instantly recognizable. The car was sharp and minimalistic in its design, something that appealed to buyers looking for a compact and affordable car that didn't scream economy vehicle. Even with its small stature, it gave off a feeling of agility and speed. Inside, the 128.3P followed the economy car ethos with a focus on simplicity. The interior was relatively basic, with minimal frills but a well-organized dashboard. The seats were comfortable enough for short trips, but the cabin was compact, which made long drives less enjoyable for those taller drivers or passengers. Fiat's goal was to maintain a practical interior that served the functional needs of daily driving, but in doing so, the cabin could feel cramped for some. The materials used in the 128.3P were budget-conscious, with hard plastics and basic upholstery, but the fit and finish were generally acceptable for a car of this price point. Under the hood, the 128.3P was powered by an 1.1-liter or 1.3-liter four-cylinder engine, with power output ranging between 55 to 75 horsepower, depending on the model and market. While this may sound underwhelming by today's standards, the engine was relatively light and paired with the compact dimensions of the car, giving it a certain level of agility in urban environments. The smaller engine allowed the car to be nimble in city traffic and was ideal for those seeking a car that could zip through tight corners and offer a fun, responsive drive on short trips. The handling was one of the car's strong points. Thanks to its front-wheel drive layout and independent suspension setup, it was stable and predictable in turns. However, despite its agility, the Fiat 128-3P was not a high-performance car. The power output was modest, which meant acceleration was far from exhilarating. The 1.1-liter engine, in particular, left the car struggling on highways or during overtaking maneuvers. Even with the slightly larger 1.3-liter engine, the car's performance didn't live up to the sporty design or marketing promise. In fact, many owners would describe the 128-3P's engine as underwhelming, given its appearance. The car was always more about style and economy than performance. But the real issue with the Fiat 128-3P, and one of the main reasons why it developed a reputation for being problematic, was its susceptibility to rust. Fiat had long struggled with the quality of the materials used in their cars, and the 128-3P was no exception. In regions with wet climates or where road salt was used, the 128-3P's body and chassis would rust away faster than you could say bodywork repair. Rust would quickly creep into the wheel arches, the bottom of the doors, and other critical parts of the car's structure, turning what was once a sleek vehicle into a patchwork of replacement panels and repairs. This was not unique to the 128-3P alone. Many Fiats from this era were plagued by rust issues, but it was especially noticeable in a car where the bodywork was so important to its visual appeal. Reliability was another major issue. While the mechanical components of the 128-3P's engine and suspension were simple and easy to maintain, the electrical systems were notoriously unreliable. Faulty wiring, poor connections, and temperamental components in the charging and lighting systems caused headaches for owners. Additionally, the suspension components could wear out prematurely, and the car's basic construction made it vulnerable to frequent repairs. The fact that Fiat used a relatively low-cost approach to materials meant that owners could expect to face repair bills for everything from electrical gremlins to suspension work. While the car was economical in its fuel consumption, keeping it running reliably became a costly endeavor in the long term. The Lamborghini Urraco, 1973 to 1979, is often seen as a bold, albeit flawed, attempt by Lamborghini to expand its appeal beyond the ultra-wealthy sports car elite. Aimed at attracting a broader market, the Urraco was the company's first attempt at producing a more affordable entry-level supercar, featuring a Tona mid-mounted V8 engine. It was designed to compete with more accessible, high-performance cars, such as the Ferrari Dino 246 GT, with the promise of both everyday usability and Italian performance. However, while the Urraco had the potential to be a formidable rival in this niche, its many shortcomings made it a difficult car to love. At first glance, the Urraco certainly held promise. Its design, penned by the legendary Marcello Gandini at Bertone, was sleek and contemporary, with sharp lines and a low, aggressive stance that made it look the part of a Lamborghini. However, unlike the bold, iconic shapes of Lamborghini's other models, such as the Miura or Countach, the Urraco's design felt a bit awkward and less cohesive. Its proportions were off, especially the rear end, which appeared somewhat bulbous compared to the more striking, angular front. Many felt that it lacked the visual presence and flair that Lamborghini was known for, making it a bit forgettable in the shadow of the brand's other supercars. Under the rear hatch, the Urraco was powered by a 2.5-liter V8 engine, later updated to a 3.0-liter V8, producing around 190 to 250 horsepower. Depending on the variant, this gave it decent performance, allowing it to reach a top speed of around 155 miles per hour and accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in approximately 6.5 seconds. Impressive figures for the time, especially for a car aimed at a more affordable market. However, while the performance was on par with other cars in its class, The engine lacked the dramatic, raw sound and emotion that Lamborghini's V12-powered models exuded. The V8, while competent, didn't quite offer the same exhilarating driving experience that was synonymous with the brand. The real problems with the Urraco arose in its build quality and reliability. Despite Lamborghini's reputation for creating visually stunning and performance-oriented cars, the Urraco's construction left much to be desired. Poor quality control plagued the assembly process, and it was not uncommon to encounter issues with the car's fit and finish. The interior, while designed with luxury in mind, used lower quality materials than what you would expect from a Lamborghini. The leather upholstery, dashboard materials, and various trim pieces were often prone to wear and tear, and the overall interior was less refined than what enthusiasts might expect from such an esteemed manufacturer. Electrical issues were another common complaint. The Urraco was notorious for its finicky electrical systems, with faults in the wiring, alternators, and electrical components being frequent sources of frustration for owners. In an era before the widespread use of advanced automotive electronics, the Urraco's electrical issues could leave owners stranded or facing expensive repairs. Additionally, like many Italian cars of the time, the Urraco suffered from the typical Italian car reputation for unreliable electrics and finicky mechanicals. Another factor that contributed to the Urraco's struggles was its own drivability. While the mid-engine layout was intended to provide excellent balance and handling, many drivers found the Urraco to be difficult to manage, especially at lower speeds or in everyday driving conditions. The power steering was not as precise as one would expect from a high-performance car, and the car's suspension was tuned more for aggressive driving than comfort. The ride was often harsh, and the car felt stiff and unrefined compared to its contemporaries. The Urraco's a lack of refinement detracted from the driving experience, especially for a car at this price point. For all its potential, it didn't deliver the magic or precision that Lamborghini enthusiasts were accustomed to. Finally, the one price for the Urraco was an issue. Although marketed as a more affordable alternative to the Miura and Countach, it was still expensive. For many buyers, the Urraco simply couldn't justify the price, considering the ongoing issues with quality and performance. Buyers who could afford a Lamborghini expected the visceral thrill of driving something truly special, but the Urraco failed to live up to the hype, leaving many to wonder if the compromise in cost came at too high a price in terms of the driving experience and reliability. One owner who had owned the car for several years summed up the experience as follows. "I bought a Urraco because I thought I was getting a piece of Lamborghini history, something more affordable but still exotic. What I didn't expect was how unreliable it was. The engine was fine, but the rest of the car had constant issues, electrical gremlins." The Rockford Pinto Cruising Wagon, 1977 to 1980, was a curious attempt by Ford to reimagine its controversial Pinto hatchback into something that could appeal to a slightly different market, those seeking a combination of sportiness and practicality in a two-door wagon. Unfortunately, the Pinto Cruising Wagon, despite its styling cues and attempt at offering a fun, youthful image, turned out to be more of a marketing blip than a lasting contender in the automotive world. At first glance, the Pinto Cruising Wagon appeared like a bright idea. Ford took the Pinto's compact body and attempted to craft a sporty, cruising wagon that could appeal to young families or those looking for a more versatile vehicle. With its sleek, aggressive lines and two-door wagon configuration, it did have some appeal for those who wanted a quirky, fun car with a bit more practicality than a sedan or coupe. However, it quickly became evident that beneath its surf-style paint job and youthful vibe, the Pinto Cruising Wagon was plagued by numerous shortcomings that ultimately doomed it to failure. First and foremost, the Pinto Cruising Wagon suffered from its Maid Runner heritage. As part of the Pinto lineup, which had already earned a notorious reputation for safety, the Pinto, as we all know, had been at the center of one of the most infamous safety scandals in automotive history due to its tendency to catch fire in rear-end collisions. This stigma followed the Cruising Wagon, despite efforts by Ford to rebrand the vehicle as a more fun, lifestyle car. No matter how hard Ford tried to distance the Cruising Wagon from its Pinto roots, potential buyers couldn't shake the association with poor safety ratings. The Pinto's reputation for being cheap and unsafe left many questioning the wisdom of buying the cruising wagon, no matter how sporty or stylish it might appear on the surface. In terms of performance, the Pinto cruising wagon didn't offer much to write home about. Ford didn't make any significant upgrades to the engine or suspension system to truly enhance the Pinto's performance credentials. The base engine was a modest 2.3-liter inline-4, offering just around 88 horsepower, which was hardly thrilling, even by the standards of a small, compact car. The cruising wagon's ride quality was uninspiring, with a soft suspension that did little to improve the car's handling over regular Pinto variants. While it looked fun, the driving experience itself was far from sporty. The car's lackluster performance, coupled with a sluggish 0 to 60 miles per hour time, made it feel like a cheaper alternative to more capable, small, sporty cars of the era. One of the more surprising aspects of the Pinto cruising wagon was its lack of real upgrades. While other manufacturers were releasing more refined, more performance-oriented vehicles, the cruising wagon didn't come with any notable enhancements in terms of handling, engine power, or interior comfort. The wagon configuration did offer more cargo space than a traditional sedan, but this wasn't enough to offset its other shortcomings. The interior, while utilitarian and simple, didn't provide the refinement expected from a car marketed to a younger, more active crowd. In essence, it offered little more than the Pinto hatchback with a wagon roof, leaving drivers with the same subpar driving experience that made the Pinto infamous. Thus, build quality of Renault was also an issue. Like many cars of the era, the Pinto cruising wagon suffered from poor quality materials, particularly in the interior. Plastics were cheap, and the overall fit and finish left much to be desired. The reputation for rust and other mechanical issues that plagued the Pinto also carried over to the cruising wagon. Over time, many of these cars became rust buckets, and owners struggled with ongoing mechanical problems that only added to the car's already poor reputation. One of the biggest drawbacks of the Pinto cruising wagon, however, was its price-to-performance ratio. For the same amount of money, buyers could have chosen a more refined, better-performing compact car, or even an entry-level sports car that offered much more in terms of excitement and build quality. The Pinto cruising wagon lacked the substance to match its styling, and it quickly became apparent that it wasn't a practical or enjoyable vehicle for many. An owner of the Pinto cruising wagon in the 1980s recalled, "I bought the Pinto cruising wagon because it looked fun, but that's where the excitement ended. It wasn't much faster than a regular Pinto, and driving it just wasn't a thrill. The interior felt cheap, and after a while it started rusting in places I didn't even know were possible. I wanted to love it, but it just didn't live up to the promise. It always felt like a car that was trying too hard to be something it wasn't." The Alfa Romeo Alfasud Sprint, 1976 to 1989, was a sporty coupe that stood out with its sharp design and peppy driving experience, based on the more practical Alfasud hatchback. It was a car that promised both Italian flair and everyday usability, combining a stylish, compact body with a spirited performance thanks to its front engine, front-wheel drive layout, and lively four-cylinder engine. On paper, it seemed like the perfect package for driving enthusiasts looking for a budget-friendly entry into the world of Italian sports cars. Visually, the Alfasud Sprint had all the hallmarks of an attractive Italian coupe. Designed by the renowned Giugiaro, it featured clean, angular lines, a sloping roofline, and a sporty stance that made it look much more expensive than it actually was. The compact dimensions and aggressive front end gave it a certain charisma, and it was undeniably charming in the way it exuded the signature style of Alfa Romeo. It was a car that invited you to get behind the wheel and enjoy the drive, and many owners appreciated the fun-to-drive nature of the Sprint. The small, lightweight chassis paired with a 1.3-liter or 1.5-liter inline-4 engine, depending on the model, made the Sprint nimble and agile, offering a driving experience that, while not incredibly fast, was definitely spirited. But despite these positive attributes, the Alfasud Sprint quickly became infamous for its and poor build quality, and in particular, its propensity to rust. The car was constructed with a heavy reliance on inexpensive materials, which resulted in poor rust protection, especially in the early models. The macro rust issues were so prevalent that they became a hallmark of the Sprint, and many owners were forced to deal with it within just a few years of ownership. This issue was compounded by the fact that the Alfasud Sprint was built in the southern Italy, where quality control was often secondary to production speed, leading to significant variability in build standards. The cheap steel used in the bodywork, combined with inadequate rust-proofing treatments, meant that the U-Sprint's body rondine would often begin to corrode long before it had a chance to truly shine. Floor pans, wheel arches, and door sills were especially prone to rust, and even with careful maintenance, many Sprints suffered from severe corrosion that made them impractical to repair over time. In addition to rust, the Alfasud Sprint also suffered from other reliability issues that tarnished its reputation. The mechanical components, while generally functional, were not always built to last. Issues with the engine, transmission, and suspension components were common, with many owners experiencing frequent breakdowns or mechanical failures. Despite the lively engine, it was not uncommon for the Sprint to have issues with overheating, electrical faults, or clutch problems, all of which could result in costly repairs. The build quality, in general, was subpar, with interior fittings and components often coming loose or wearing out quicker than expected. Despite its many flaws, thus driving experience one of the Alfasud Sprint was a redeeming quality for many. It handled well with a direct steering feel and a chassis that was well suited to spirited driving. The lightweight construction and responsive suspension made it a delight to take through twisty roads, and its compact size made it easy to maneuver in tight spaces. However, this fun-to-drive factor was undermined by the constant worries about the car falling apart due to rust and mechanical failures. For many owners, the joy of driving was often overshadowed by the frustration of keeping the car on the road. An owner of the Alfasud Sprint from the early 1980s described his experience with the car. "When I first bought the Sprint, I was in love with how it drove. It was light, agile, and it had that classic Alfa Romeo charm. But after a couple of years, the rust started appearing everywhere, around the wheel arches, under the sills, even in the engine bay. It was a constant battle just to keep it together. I loved the car, but I couldn't trust it anymore, and it eventually just became too much of a headache. The fun of driving it was always offset by the worry of when it would break down next." While the Alfasud Sprint was a car with undeniable charm, it ultimately fell short in areas that matter most to car owners. Its rust issues, build quality problems, and overall reliability issues made it a frustrating experience for many. Even though it was fun to drive, that joy was tempered by the constant maintenance and repairs that were required to keep the car on the road. For those who were willing to put in the effort, the Alfasud Sprint could still be a delightful car to drive, but it was not one that could be easily enjoyed without the shadow of impending mechanical problems and rust hanging over it. The Plymouth Arrow GT and 1976 to 1980 was a sporty coupe produced by Chrysler as part of its effort to bring a performance-oriented vehicle to the American market, based on the Mitsubishi Lancer platform. It was marketed as a budget-friendly alternative to other more established sports coupes, combining the appeal of a compact, affordable car with a sportier edge. While the Arrow GT had some interesting features and styling for its time, it quickly became clear that it wasn't as competitive or exciting as its rivals in the same segment. At first glance, the Plymouth Arrow GT was a visually appealing car. The styling was influenced by contemporary Japanese design, with clean lines, a sloping roof, and a wide, aggressive stance that looked sporty enough to catch the eye of potential buyers. The Mazda trim, which was marketed as the performance variant, came with slightly sportier features such as sportier wheels, a rear spoiler, and a more performance-oriented suspension. These elements were designed to suggest that the Arrow GT was a worthy competitor to the likes of the Moshford Mustang or the Chevrolet Camaro, but it was clear from the outset that the Arrow GT was more about looks than substance. In terms of performance, the Surrey Plymouth Arrow GT was severely underwhelming. Despite its sporty appearance, the car was powered by a 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine that produced only about 80 horsepower, a figure that was meager at best, especially when compared to the performance of similar cars in the segment. The Arrow GT was slow to accelerate and lacked the power necessary to deliver the exciting driving experience that many buyers were hoping for. In fact, the car's performance was closer to that of a compact economy car than a true sports coupe. Even though the engine was efficient, it didn't provide much in the way of thrills, and the car's overall driving experience left much to be desired. One of the biggest issues with the Arrow GT was its build quality. While the car was inexpensive, that came at a cost, particularly when it came to materials and craftsmanship. The Arrow GT was cheaply built, with a lot of plastic trim, low-quality interior materials, and a less-than-ideal fit and finish. The dashboard and controls felt flimsy, and over time, many of these components would start to deteriorate. The car's suspension and handling were also underwhelming, with a ride that felt overly stiff and unrefined. It wasn't as agile or composed as other sporty cars, leaving drivers with an experience that felt more like an economy car with a spoiler than a legitimate sports coupe. Another key downside was the lack of innovation in the Arrow GT. While cars like the Datsun 2800 or the Mazda RX-7 were offering exciting new technologies, performance, and styling in their own right, the Arrow GT failed to keep pace with the evolving landscape of sports cars. Its engine lacked modern efficiency or power, its handling was outdated, and it simply didn't offer anything groundbreaking. The Arrow GT also lacked the luxury features or refined interior touches that could have set it apart from rivals in a more positive light. A former owner of the Plymouth Arrow GT summarized the experience best. "When I bought the Arrow GT, I was looking for something sporty that was also affordable. The styling looked great, and it seemed like a good option at the time. But after driving it for a while, I realized how underpowered it was. The engine barely got out of its own way, and I was constantly disappointed by how sluggish it was. The interior felt cheap, and even the suspension was rough. It wasn't a fun car to drive. It was just a car that looked sporty but didn't deliver on the promise." In terms of competition, the Plymouth Arrow GT had a hard time standing out. Rival cars like the Ford Mustang II, Chevrolet Monza, and Datsun 2800 offered better performance, superior build quality, and more modern features. The Arrow GT may have looked the part of a sportier coupe, but when it came time to deliver the performance and driving excitement that many buyers expected from a sporty car, it simply couldn't keep up. Ultimately, the Plymouth Arrow GT was a missed opportunity, a car that had a promising exterior design but fell short in terms of performance and build quality. It may have been affordable, but it didn't have much to offer in terms of driving excitement, and it was overshadowed by more capable competitors. The Arrow GT's underwhelming engine, poor reliability, and cheap interior left many owners disappointed, making it one of the more forgettable sporty cars of its era. The MG Midget 1500, 1974 to 1980, was the final iteration of the classic MG Midget Roadster, a tiny, affordable sports car that had originally been introduced in the 1960s. It was designed to provide a simple, no-frills driving experience, appealing to those seeking a small, budget-friendly two-seater with a traditional British roadster feel. However, by the time the 1501 model hit the market in the mid-1970s, the Midget was beginning to show its age, and it became increasingly difficult to compete with more modern and capable rivals. Styling-wise, the Midget retained its traditional, somewhat quaint British charm. The compact dimensions and minimalist design were perfect for drivers looking for an affordable and fun open-air experience. But by the time the 1500 rolled around, The appeal of its design was wearing thin. While the earlier Midget models had a certain fresh appeal, the Midget 1500 felt outdated in an era when other sports cars were moving towards more modern, refined designs with better performance. In terms of performance, the MG Midget 1500 was painfully underpowered for its time. The 1500 was powered by a 1.5-liter four-cylinder engine, which produced only around 65 horsepower. While this engine was an improvement over the earlier 1,275 cubic centimeter units, it was still nowhere near the performance levels expected from a sports car. The Midget's small engine provided minimal acceleration and a very sluggish driving experience, particularly when compared to other compact roadsters on the market at the time, such as the Datsun 240's An or Fiat 124 Spider. The Midget's performance didn't live up to its sporty image, and many owners found that it lacked the zip and thrill that they had expected from a British roadster. Its underwhelming power also meant that it wasn't particularly capable in terms of handling on the highway, often feeling overworked at higher speeds. As with many British cars of the era, the MG Midget 1500 was notorious for its poor build quality and reliability issues. The car suffered from common British engineering flaws, including electrical gremlins and rusty problems that plagued many MGs of the period. The rusty issues were particularly problematic, with the Midget being prone to corroding quickly, especially in areas like the nose sills, wheel arches, and floor pans. These rust spots would often require costly and time-consuming repairs, and many Midgets from this era are now little more than rusted shells due to the lack of long-term durability. The electrical problems were another major issue. Many Midget 1500 owners reported unreliable wiring, with lights flickering or completely failing, and issues with the alternator and ignition system. These issues would often arise unexpectedly, leaving owners frustrated and frequently needing to replace or repair electrical components. The electrical gremlins added to the overall lack of reliability of the Midget, making it a car that was more of a project than a practical daily driver for many. An owner of the MG Midget 1500 from the late 1970s shared their experience. When I bought the Midget, I was drawn to its small size and cute looks, but I quickly realized how underpowered it was. The car was slow, and it couldn't keep up on highways or even on city streets when I tried to push it. It was also constantly having electrical problems. Sometimes I'd be driving along and the headlights would just flicker or go out completely. And then there was the rust. It seemed like I was always scraping and fixing rust spots. It was a fun little car when it worked, but it was a nightmare when it didn't. Beyond the performance and reliability issues, the MG Midget 1500 was also fairly uncomfortable. The small, cramped interior wasn't designed for comfort, with limited space even for smaller adults. The seats were basic and lacking in any form of proper support, and the ride quality left much to be desired. The suspension system was relatively primitive, which resulted in a rough and bumpy ride, especially over uneven roads. While the Midget might have been fun for short, leisurely drives, it was far from practical for long road trips or daily use. Furthermore, the Midget 1500 was outdated in comparison to other cars in its class, with technology and performance that simply didn't stack up to more modern vehicles. By the late 1970s, sports cars were becoming more refined, with better engines, more advanced suspension systems, and more luxurious interiors, while the Midget was still using technology and design that had been in place for decades. The MG Midget 1500 is often remembered as a nostalgic, but ultimately flawed sports car. While it had its merits as a small, affordable roadster, its underpowered engine, lack of modern features, and on constant mechanical and rust issues, the Chevrolet Monza Spider, 1975 to 1980, was introduced as a sporty version of the Chevrolet Monza, a compact car that was initially designed to compete in the growing small car market. The Spider trim package was marketed as a performance-oriented option, aimed at drivers who wanted something sportier than the standard Monza, but at an affordable price. The Spider was intended to give a muscle car feel, but unfortunately, it didn't quite deliver on its promise. The Monza Spider had an appealing worse styling package, with stripes, special wheels, and a more aggressive look compared to the standard Monza. It was visually designed to resemble the sporty cars of the 1970s, offering buyers a compact car with the appearance of a performance vehicle. The Spider featured a two-tone color scheme and decals that enhanced its sporty look. In theory, it seemed like a good way to offer a little flair to the compact car market. However, while the styling was eye-catching, the performance sound of the Monza Spider left much to be desired. The car was equipped with a variety of engine options, ranging from the low-powered 4-cylinder to a V8 in later models. Despite the V8, which was the most powerful option, the Spider was far from a performance car in the true sense. The car's power-to-weight ratio was unremarkable, and its acceleration and handling were relatively mediocre. It wasn't particularly fast or nimble, especially when compared to other cars of its era that were marketed as sporty compact vehicles. The Monza Spider lacked the kind of driving dynamics that enthusiasts expected from a sporty model, and it often felt underwhelming. As with many cars of the 1970s, the Monza Spider suffered from numerous quality control issues. While its appearance might have impressed at first glance, the build quality was subpar. Many owners reported problems with the fit and finish of panels, with misaligned doors, faulty trim, and inconsistent paint quality. These were frustrating issues, particularly considering that the Spider was marketed as a special model with performance upgrades. Rust was another major issue that plagued the Monza Spider. By the time many of these cars were a few years old, they were showing significant signs of corrosion, especially in areas like the wheel wells and underbody. The Monza Spider, like many cars of its era, was built with a less than ideal rust-proofing process, leading to premature rust damage that not only affected the car's appearance, but also its structural integrity. Many owners found themselves dealing with rust repair as early as the third or fourth year of ownership, which significantly lowered the car's long-term appeal and reliability. One major flaw was the poor reliability of its mechanical components. The car was prone to a range of mechanical issues, including electrical problems, transmission failures, and issues with the fuel system. These problems were exacerbated by inconsistent manufacturing and assembly, leading to frustrating experiences for owners. Despite being marketed as a sporty car, the Monza Spider required frequent repairs, and it often didn't perform as expected when compared to its competitors in the compact and sporty car segments. An owner from the late 1970s recalled their experience with the Monza Spider. "I had high hopes for the Monza Spider when I bought it. It looked fantastic with those racing stripes and the aggressive stance, but the performance was just mediocre. The engine options weren't enough to give it any real kick, and handling was far from sharp. The worst part was the rust. After just a couple of winters, I started seeing the car fall apart around me. The electrical system was a nightmare too. It felt like I was always fixing something. The car looked the part, but it didn't live up to the hype." On the interior, the Monza Spider Premier was more of a standard compact car, and it wasn't exactly luxurious. The seats were uncomfortable for long drives, and the interior design was typical for the era, offering little more than basic amenities. While the Spider package gave the car a sporty look, it didn't translate into a more refined driving experience. The interior quality was also poor, with cheap plastics and materials that didn't hold up well over time, especially when exposed to the elements. In terms of driving experience, the Monza Spider wasn't much to write home about. Its handling was uninspiring, with vague steering and an unrefined suspension that didn't offer the crisp, sporty feel that enthusiasts look for in a compact performance car. The Monza Spider was more of a cruiser than a real performance vehicle, and its driving dynamics often felt out of place in the sporty category. Ultimately, the Chevrolet Monza Spider was a car that promised a lot but failed to deliver on most fronts. Its styling and appearance were appealing. The Ferrari 365 GTC/4 1971 to 1972 was a luxurious Grand Tour aimed at offering a blend of comfort and performance, equipped with Ferrari's iconic V12 engine. As a member of Ferrari's esteemed lineup, it was designed to compete in the high-end market, offering owners a blend of elegance, refinement, and driving excitement typical of the brand's GT models. However, despite its pedigree, the 365 GTC/4 ended up being overshadowed by more iconic models, notably the Ferrari Daytona, and faced several shortcomings that made it less popular among enthusiasts and collectors. At the heart of the 365 GTC/4 was a 4.4-liter V12 engine, which on paper should have provided ample performance. The engine generated 320 horsepower, which allowed the car to reach top speeds of around 160 miles per hour. In theory, it was an impressive power plant, especially for a Grand Tourer. However, despite this substantial power, the 365 GTC/4 was hampered by its weight or no. Weighing in at over 3,500 pounds, the car's heavy chassis made it less agile compared to other Ferraris of the era. The weight, combined with its slightly outdated suspension setup, meant that the GTC/4 did not handle with the same precision and athleticism that owners expected from a Ferrari. The car was designed more for cruising at high speeds on highways rather than carving corners or performing like a track-ready sports car. In addition to its weight, the 365 GTC/4 was often overlooked because it came at a time when Ferrari was also offering the Daytona, a much more aggressive and more widely admired sports car. The Daytona had superior performance, a sleeker design, and a reputation that resonated with Ferrari enthusiasts. While the weighty 365 GTC/4 was more of a Grand Tourer than a pure sports car, it still struggled to match the Daytona's level of allure. In terms of prestige, the GTC/4 couldn't quite match the reputation of its sibling, which contributed to it being somewhat of a forgotten Ferrari. From an ownership standpoint, the 365 GTC/4 had another significant drawback: maintenance costs. Like many Ferrari models of its era, the GTC/4 was notorious for expensive upkeep. The V12 engine, while capable, was prone to requiring frequent attention, and the car's complex systems meant that repairs could be costly. Parts were expensive, and because the car was not as widely produced as other Ferraris, availability of parts and expert knowledge of the car's intricacies was limited. This meant that maintaining the car often came at a high price, leading to frustration for owners who had to keep up with the car's quirks. Additionally, the car's cast design, though elegant and unmistakably Ferrari, was more traditional and less striking than some of its contemporaries. While it carried the brand's signature lines, the 365 GTC/4 lacked the visual flair of models like the Daytona or the later 365 GTB/4. The more conservative design of the GTC/4 didn't stand out in the way that many Ferrari owners might have hoped for, especially considering the premium price tag attached to the vehicle. Driving the 365 GTC/4 also came with its own set of challenges. While the car's V12 engine could provide a thrilling experience on long, straight roads, its heavy front end and somewhat cumbersome handling meant that it wasn't particularly enjoyable in more dynamic driving conditions. The car's steering was not as communicative or precise as some of its peers, making it harder to enjoy in tight corners or winding roads. It wasn't the engaging, responsive sports car that many Ferrari buyers expected, even if it was more comfortable and luxurious than many of its contemporaries. One owner from the 1970s recounted their experience with the Ferrari 365 GTC/4. The Ferrari 365 GTC/4 was a car that looked the part, but after a few months of ownership, I began to question whether it was the right choice. Sure, it had the Ferrari name and the V12 engine, but the car was so heavy and sluggish in comparison to other Ferraris I've driven. It wasn't the thrill ride I was hoping for. It just didn't have the same excitement as the Daytona. And don't get me started on the maintenance. Parts were rare, and when something went wrong, it felt like it would cost a small fortune to fix. In terms of luxury, the 365 GTC/4 had plush interior materials and was designed for long-distance comfort, which was a key appeal for buyers looking for a grand tour. It featured leather upholstery, a full dashboard, and a well-appointed cabin, but the driving experience didn't live up to the promise of a true Ferrari performance car. The car was a bit too sedate, too heavy, and lacked the finesse of its more performance-oriented counterparts. Ultimately, the Ferrari 365 GTC/4 stands as a bit of a disappointment in the brand's history. While it's undoubtedly a beautiful car with a powerful engine, its weight, handling issues, the Aston Martin Lagonda Series 1, 1974 to 1975, was an ambitious attempt by the renowned British automaker to push the boundaries of luxury, technology, and design. With its sleek, angular shape and cutting-edge features, the Lagonda aimed to offer something truly futuristic, combining Aston Martin's usual craftsmanship with a level of technological sophistication that was rare for the time. However, despite its striking design and technological innovations, the Lagonda ultimately became infamous for its numerous problems, both mechanical and financial, and is often cited as one of the most challenging vehicles to own from Aston Martin's storied history. At the heart of the Lagonda Series 1 was a 5.3-liter Fiat engine. Derived from the same power plant found in Aston Martin's other luxury models of the era. With around 280 horsepower, the car was capable of impressive performance, but it was the electronics that truly set the Lagonda apart from other cars of its time. The Series 1 was equipped with one of the most advanced digital instrument clusters ever seen in a production car, with HUS digital readouts for speed, fuel, and other vital statistics. The Lagonda also featured digital climate control, an early attempt at electronic systems that would later become commonplace in luxury cars. In theory, this forward-thinking technology should have made the Lagonda a symbol of innovation and a pioneer in automotive luxury. However, as is often the case with early adoption of technology, the Lagonda's vulnerable electronics proved to be more of a curse than a blessing. The sophisticated systems that were supposed to give it an edge over its competitors ended up being highly unreliable. The digital dashboard was prone to malfunctioning, with displays frequently cutting out or providing inaccurate readings. The sonar climate control system also faced frequent issues, leaving owners frustrated with a car that was often more complicated than it was convenient. As a result, the Lagonda became a symbol of the dangers of introducing complex, unproven technology in a car before it had been thoroughly tested and refined. In addition to its electronics, the Lagonda Series 1 faced issues with its build quality and overall reliability. While Aston Martin was known for producing luxury vehicles with fine craftsmanship, the Lagonda was plagued by various mechanical problems that caused it to be more of a headache for owners than a pleasure to drive. Engine and transmission issues were common, and parts were often difficult to source or expensive to replace, adding to the car's high ownership costs. The car's handling was also considered underwhelming compared to other sports and luxury cars of the era, despite its performance capabilities. It was heavy, and the ride quality was not as smooth as one would expect from a high-end coupe of that time. Another significant issue with the Lagonda Series 1 was its price. Aston Martin, known for building cars that catered to the ultra-wealthy, set a high price for the Lagonda, expecting it to be a statement of luxury and innovation. However, due to its complexity and high production costs, the car quickly became cost-prohibitive, with very few buyers willing to take the plunge. Production was limited, and sales were far lower than Aston Martin had hoped for. The Lagonda's exclusivity was partly a result of this lack of demand, but it also meant that it never achieved the mass appeal that Aston Martin hoped it would. From the perspective of an owner, the Aston Martin Lagonda Series 1 was often a source of frustration. One former owner noted, "When I first bought the Lagonda, I was drawn to the futuristic looks and the idea of owning a car that had all these high-tech features, but it didn't take long before I started having issues. The dashboard would fail, and I'd have to rely on analog gauges. The digital climate controls, they never worked properly. It was a beautiful car to look at, but driving it felt more like a chore than a luxury experience. I'd spend more time fixing things than actually enjoying the car. The Lagonda's styling was undoubtedly bold and unique. The car's sharp lines and angular design, which were groundbreaking at the time, still hold a certain appeal for fans of automotive design. The one long wheelbase, contoured wide stance, and distinctive sloping roofline gave the Lagonda a futuristic look that made it stand out even by today's standards. Inside, the cabin was as luxurious as one would expect from an Aston Martin, with Eckrich leather upholstery and wood trim, and ample space for the driver and passengers. Yet, despite all the lavish touches, the Lagonda's technology and mechanical shortcomings meant that many owners found it more trouble than it was worth.